So let's talk about the meanest and the greenest orcs around, with the sheer unstoppable force of the Orky Death Wing in the Bully Boyz. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking orcs once more, and in this video I thought we'd do an overview of the Bully Boyz detachment, the one that's truly made Meganobz great again, and perhaps the single most competitive Orky detachment right now. In the video we'll talk a little bit about the models of the Orky Elite, then move on to the detachment rules, go through some of the most relevant datasheets, and then take a look through 3 examples of Bully Boy army lists that have done well in tournaments already. In the Orc army, the Bully Boyz represent the fighting elite of the Orcs, basically the war boss's personal band of experienced veteran Orcs and Nobz, the biggest, scariest, and most battle-scarred of their kind, often Orky elites that have been fighting alongside the war boss since the early days of their clan when they rose to power on their home planet. In-game, the detachment focuses around the 2 sets of Orky elites, the Nobz and the Meganobz. The Nobz kit goes back at least a fair way at the moment, the Meganobz is a bit more recent and has the option to build the big mech. The Meganobz definitely have more flexibility of the war gear, though do cost a lot more as well. £24 or $38 for the regular Nobz maybe it isn't the most awful for Games Workshop in terms of points per dollar and models on the table, whereas I would say that $70 for the Meganobz is a bit on the expensive side. If you were looking to pick up either of these to flesh out this detachment, I generally aim to do so at discount retailers paying a little bit less than Games Workshop, usually around 10 to 20% off depending on where they are around the world. I do have examples to a few of them linked in the video description. Bear in mind things like 3D printed alternatives as well out there. There are a fair few going out there for Meganobz on places like Etsy, even if you're not getting STLs and printing yourself. In any case, let's focus on the actual Bully Boyz detachment. As mentioned, it does seem to be the single strongest one that the Orcs have at the moment, out of the gate after Codex release, just gaining immense strength from sheer amount of Meganobz, and it is the one that people seem to have been taking to the top of a whole bunch of tournaments. Let's talk through the detachment rules and the Meganobz and their strength, and a few other datasheets. The core rule for the Bully Boyz is "the boss is watching", and provided you've got a war boss keyword model on the battlefield, or in a transport vehicle that's on the battlefield, then you get to call a second war once per game, and that war applies to anything with the Nobz, Meganobz, or war boss keyword. So essentially for a whole bunch of the core of your army, that'll be 2 wars in a game rather than 1. Obviously it's absolutely great for the Orky elites that get all the rest of the support in the detachment, with all of the stratagems and things being focused on Nobz and Meganobz, but it still is pretty great for anything else that can take war bosses. Things like Boys, Beast Snagger Boys, Squig Hog Boys, or even War Bikes if you want them could all have the War Boss keyword, and getting extra war on any of them is pretty awesome too. I think often for detachment rules, once per game boosts tend to be a little bit more tame in other places in Warhammer 40k, though for Orcs I really don't think that that's the case. I feel like as just about every Orc player will know, the army just has a massive surge of strength in the war turn, and being able to get that on 2 critical turns in the game rather than just 1 is pretty awesome. The +1 attack and strength makes every unit a lot more violent, advance and charge can much more reliably get you into very long charges, and the 5+ invulnerable saves are a huge durability boost against the enemy counter-attack, never mind the Meganobz getting the 4+ feel no pain for 2 turns, which is perhaps the true absurdity of this detachment. It does mean that compared with the general purpose Warhorde, you are missing out on the sustained hits all game long. But clearly the math seems to work out on this, particularly for the Meganobz. With their double dipping on the war, you get ridiculous value. And I feel that often you might want to call the war turns 2 and 3, so really have perhaps the 2 most important damage and defense turns in the game just entirely in your pocket. And it means that the strategy of maybe just backing off and trying not to engage in the single turn that the Orcs have the war just doesn't really work against this. You can't really afford to sit back and not try and take objectives and deal damage for 2 out of the 5 turns in the game, so it makes the war a lot harder to counter. Moving on to the stratagems, all these can only be used for Nobz and Meganobz. For 1 CP there's Armed to the Teeth, which is a really nice one. The unit gets to reroll hit rolls of 1, usually fighting, though you could use it shooting as well, or all hit rolls in the turn of the war. That adds up to a very dangerous damage stratagem. You could potentially have Meganobz with kill saws hitting on a 3+ re-rolling with a war boss in the unit, which will just get you loads of hits with those usually kind of inaccurate weapons. It's pretty excellent with Nobz and power claws as well. For 1 CP there's Too Arrogant to Die. When the unit gets attacked either in the shooting phase or again more likely in the fight phase, you get to fight on death on a 5+ per model, as everything's getting better in the war. So your Nobz or Meganobz could be fighting on death on a 3+ there. That's a really excellent one to have just in counter to heavy enemy melee armies. Means that if you've charged your unit in, it destroys something nasty, and then the enemy's about to countercharge you and just wipe out one of your units, you can hopefully drag down a whole load of nasty things with them. That might be quite nice on the slightly more fragile regular Nobz, more so than the Meganobz perhaps. For 1 CP, there's always looking for a fight. If your unit destroys an enemy unit in the fight phase, you get to consolidate D3 plus 3 inches or flat 6 inches in the war. This one's a little bit situational, but if you look out for opportunities to use it, it can come up a bit more than you might expect. It can be really quite nasty against an enemy gunline army, hopefully charge a unit into one thing that you're trying to kill, and then pile it into the next one, so hopefully they won't be able to shoot with that squad, maybe having to fall back and have the rest of the unit shoot you. Or even if it's a tank or vehicle, it's a difficult choice between remaining in combat with big guns never tire and taking a ton more melee damage in their own turn, or just dropping back with that as well. It's pretty great to combine with one of the next stratagems as well. For 1 CP, there's a damage dealing impact one called Crushing Impact. After charging with the Nobz or Meganobz, roll 1d6 per model within engagement range. For each 5 plus or 4 plus in the war, you deal 1 mortal wound, capped out at a maximum of 6 wounds total, though given that the biggest squad that you can do with this is Nobz plus a war boss, in general you are going to be likely to average less than that anyway, even if you do manage to get them all into melee range, which is going to be a bit of a stretch. I feel like it's not truly awful, but probably usually going to be a bit on the redundant side. For the most part, it's just going to be a lot better to use Armed to the Teeth and get the rerolls on all their Scary Power Claw or Kill Sword type attacks. Though I guess occasionally it might be able to do certain shenanigans and things like charge one thing and mortal wound it, and then when you actually get to fight, pile in and attack something else. For 1 CP, there's Cut 'em Down. This one's a nice one to force desperate escape tests when the enemy tries to fall back. A good chance to inflict some casualties on enemy models, potentially on very serious big models if the opponent tries to fall back on them and the enemy has to take a -1 to the test in the war. Could mean that trying to escape these guys could be a bit of a risky business, or occasionally just the threat of this meaning that the opponent might leave some things locked up in melee when they really don't want to, perhaps taking another ton more power claw damage otherwise. As mentioned, you could potentially combine this with the consolidate into something far away. You could use this to tie up an enemy unit and then force some very painful desperate escape tests as they fall back. Finally, for 1 CP, we have a pretty scary durability one. This one's called Hulking Brutes. This one's a shooting defense one, and it means that you worsen enemy AP by 1 for enemies shooting the unit this phase. Basically Orky Armour of Contempt, but shooting phase only. Absolutely terrifying on Meganobz given how durable they already can be from the 4 plus Feel No Pain. Stacking this in their 2 plus save and cover already means that they're just hellishly durable. Never mind the okay toughness, big wound count, and Feel No Pain they get, all for the cheap cost of 30 points per model. Overall, I feel like there's a lot of really good ones here just for big pressure sort of armies moving up the board and hitting things in combat very hard. I'd say probably Armed to the Teeth and the Hulking Brutes ones are probably the most interesting. Extra damage and defense and quite a lot of it. All the rest could be good situationally though. I feel like maybe the Mortal Wound Impact Hits one might be the weakest of them though. Finally, for the detachment, we come to Enhancements. For 25 points, we've got the Teleporter. A Warboss in Mega Armor is the only one that can take this, and their unit gets Deep Strike. Basically, you get to make like a Terminator squad, Deep Strike your unit onto the board, and this could potentially be very interesting with Rapid Ingress as well. Maybe if your opponent has first turn and you drop them at the start of turn 2, then you could be delivered into a very easy charge range with something important on your turn 2. This one's a pretty nice one. And the Mega Armoured Warboss is a pretty reasonable choice for leading Meganobz units. Next up for 20 points we've got Big Gob. This one's an infantry warboss of any type. At the start of the phase, one unit within engagement range takes Battle Shock at -1 to the test. Often a bit of a weedy one that one, unless you happen to be scoring secondary objectives at the end of the turn, or the opponent really wanted to do something like a big damage or defense stratagem. Every so often you might prevent them from being able to use stratagems on the unit, which definitely isn't nothing, though it will be a bit random for 20 points I think. Next up for 15 points we've got the Biggest Boss, an extra 2 wounds on an infantry warboss. I feel like this isn't awful as a points filler, but beyond that not really adding loads of value. An extra 2 wounds will rarely be the difference between the warboss living and dying, and a lot of the time they might not actually be really under any threat anyway, as the opponent's likely going to be struggling to chew through those ridiculously tanky Meganobz. Finally for 10 points we've got Ed Stomper. This one allows the bearer personally to reroll wound rolls of 1 against units below starting strength, or full wound rerolls against things below half strength, and it does only affect the bearer only, not their squad. Not the most exciting, again I guess could use up 10 points if you had them spare. If it does get to full wound rerolls, it's not that bad, but it's going to only trigger against a very small minority of your targets. I personally rate Teleporter as the most interesting enhancement. Getting Deep Strike and having a threat of a rapid ingress Meganobz unit is really quite scary. Still doesn't necessarily seem auto-include though, as Orks have got other good ways to get them to the fight like trucks. Otherwise the rest all seem okay points fillers, though I probably wouldn't go out of my way to include them. Let's talk about the main event carrying the detachment though. The terrifying Meganobz and what sort of damage and defense they have in Bully Boyz. Most competitive 2000 point army lists seem to be running at least 15 of these, if not more, and they did remain 30 points each in the updated Codex points, where a fair few people might not have been too surprised if they'd gone up to 35 apiece. As it is, you get a whole load of Orky armor, 3 wounds at toughness 6 with a 2+ save, already isn't that bad for 30 points, but as mentioned a few times now, they get a 4+ feel no pain in the turn of the war. Really not too bad in other detachments and gives them a very tanky turn, but in this it means that you could be benefiting from that 4+ feel no pain for 2 turns, particularly turn 2 or turn 3 seem to be the best options in my opinion most of the time. Otherwise then, the main choices of war gear often tend to be either Power Claw or dual kill saws. The dual kill saws perhaps are the most common ones I've seen run since the post codex, only 2 attacks in melee, but they hit very hard at strength 12, AP 3 and damage 2 with twin links. Obviously in the turn of the war that goes up to strength 13 and 3 attacks each, and I guess the dual kill sword does have the advantage in that you don't care about advancing them, so there's not going to be any trade-off with shooting when you're advancing and charging during the war. Power Claw and Gun of some sort I think really isn't awful though. You get 3 attacks or 4 in the war, again hitting on 4s but at lower strength and no twin links. It will be a bit better against hordes, though won't punch up quite as hard against things like very tough vehicles like Land Raiders or Knights. Just for Wargear in combat loadout, this is the damage output of 3 Meganobz not in the war. You can see here that the double saw loadout does have the best damage output against the vast majority of these targets, only losing out against the hordes. The war might well benefit the double saw loadout perhaps a bit more than the others here though, given that that starts with 2 attacks and goes up to 3, so a big 50% damage increase on the numbers that you can see here. Admittedly, the claws will like to go to strength 10 though, and that can help against some targets like Terminators and things and help them catch up or get ahead a bit there. Perhaps one of the more commonly taken competitive loadouts might be this one though, say 5 Meganobz with twin kill saws plus a war boss all for 230 points. People often wind up taking 5 Meganobz versus 6 due to being able to fit in trucks like that. As you can see, this unit has enough damage to be a threat to just about everything in the game. In the war, they'll still absolutely pulverise Termagants, and perhaps most efficient against 2 wound infantry with those buckets of damage to attacks. For Terminators, they very nearly wipe out a 5-man Terminator squad in one round of combat. Do 20 wounds to a Rhino, though I think the numbers would be the same here if it was, say, a Predator tank, or something that was toughness 10 or 11 with a 3+ save, and they fall just shy of killing a Land Raider, around about 15 wounds or so there, though that could go down a bit if it used Armour of Contempt. If you use full reroll hits for 1 CP, you could add around about an extra 30% damage to these numbers as well. It affects the main Mega boss a little bit less, due to him already hitting on a 2 here. But it does mean that if they were slamming into anything that they were going to seriously struggle to kill, they could rustle up a fair bit more damage as they needed. Overall, they're certainly fairly terrifying stuff. The durability is kind of obvious just from their raw numbers, but here's how many hits you need to kill 5 Meganobz in a turn of the war. For this one I've assumed that you're shooting them, and they're either using that AP debuff stratagem or they're getting cover for an improvement on their saves. Though I guess if the enemy was just trying to focus one really critical unit in a great position, you might have been able to position them so they've got both. As you'd expect, small arms just don't really do anything to them. In theory it'd be 540 bolt shots needing to land to wipe out 5 Meganobz, which just isn't really going to happen. Interestingly enough, for more sort of mid-strength, mid-damage things that are usually going to be quite good against elite infantry, it's kind of similar between damage 2 and higher AP, or damage 3 and lower AP. With a 2+ save and a +1 save on the go from somewhere, it surprisingly actually outweighs the extra damage stats on the strength 10 AP2 damage 3 thing, though either of them are just going to need to again land a fairly ludicrous number of hits on the Meganobz here, if they do want to bring down the units. Even things like las cannons aren't necessarily a shoe-in to destroying the squad. Slightly rough and ready maths say that you need around about 24 las cannon hits on average, never mind the fact that you'd miss with a bunch of them. Basically the short story is that almost nothing is particularly efficient in killing Meganobz in the war, either you're having to commit some ludicrously dangerous anti-tank guns to them, or anything with sort of middling AP or middling strength might come up wanting against their raw stat line, never mind the feel no pain. These numbers are pretty terrifying when you could have 3 squads like this, causing problems in the midfield, and most Bully Boyz lists tend to. Otherwise, for supporting units for them, the War Boss in Mega Armor is maybe one of the most interesting. For 80 points he's nice and cheap, gives you +1 to hit in melee, which is really relevant for the Meganobz given that they hit on a 4+ normally, and contributes a whole bunch of attacks with his huge chopper which goes up to damage 3 in the war. Quite a nice addition to the unit for 3 wound infantry and things, and trying to destroy enemy big tough vehicles. He can also bear that teleporter enhancement, which is quite nice as well. In general, I've seen more people using war bosses in their competitive lists versus the big mech in Mega Armor. I feel like we would have seen this guy a bit more if he hadn't gone up to 100 points from the 85 he was before, but I still think he's a very usable option. He can give the unit a 4+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks, make the unit yet more tanky and bounce back a bit by reviving slain models and healing damaged ones, and also contribute with a little bit of his own shooting and melee, even if he isn't quite on the same sort of level as the war boss in terms of hitting power. Finally, for Meganob leader characters, there's the big boss himself, Ghazghkull Thraka. 235 points I think is alright for him. He will make his unit just basically go through virtually anything in the game with the big boosts to hit and wounds, plus lethal hits from Makari and his own kind of cataclysmic attacks with a bunch of strength 14 and damage 4, or his massive sweep attack. It does mean that if you're with an entire unit of Meganobs, then he will be foot slogging, given that he doesn't quite fit in a transport with the smallest amount of them, given Makari as well. Though even if he did weird things and ran him solo, he could still get the double turns of Bois, given that he has the War Boss keyword, and he wouldn't be trivial to take out as well, with Makari bouncing off a whole load of damage before you even get to the main boss. Otherwise, to back up the armoured gits with a bit more raw muscle and more bodies, we've got the regular Nobz. Compared with the Mega Armor, they're a fair bit more fragile, even with the -1 to wound that they have on the go, but can still hit things very hard with their power claws, particularly with multiple turns worth of war. After you've taken a good number of Meganobs, they do look like perhaps the next most obvious unit that you can use. They can still get to crazy levels of damage with the whole reroll hit stratagem, and could be yet another terrifying melee threat to have jumping out of trucks and transports. Often to lead them, it's a good idea to have a war boss, 65 points for one of the most efficient Orky datasheets in the Codex, a nice fighty character with a big 9 attacks in the war. Pretty terrifying to have that twice in the game, plus again making the Nobz attacks more accurate, and it can be used to give the war boss keyword to boys as well, so you could have 2 turns of war on your more basic objective securing guys. Multiple turns of boys with high invulnerable saves can make for a fairly quite cheap and still pretty dangerous unit, even if they might not seem the most obvious option versus more Nobz in this detachment. Finally, to get all the scary stuff into combat, there's the trucks. They're still seen as a pretty godly datasheet for Orcs post-Codex. 65 points just gets you a whole load of value, 10 wounds with toughness 8 and a 4+ save is easily durable enough for that points cost. They move fast at 12-inch move, can carry 5 Meganobs plus a war boss, or 10 regular Nobs plus characters, and even once they've delivered their cargo, they can be more of a nuisance threat than the opponent might really want, potentially tank shocking things hard with those wrecking balls, rolling a whole bunch of mortal wound dice against them, potentially meaning that they can actually have a good chance of clearing up smaller nuisance threats while the Meganobs get stuck into the serious stuff. Battle wagons are good too, I think, if you want to go for a more pricey unit that's got higher toughness with that nice AP debuff rule, though it seems for most armies trucks seem to do absolutely fine. Overall, maybe not too hard to see why this list is one of the scariest and more successful Orky lists so far. Meganobs are just kind of nuts for those 2 turns of war. A really good threat range on the charge, with an average charge threat at around 16 inches, so it's not like they're slow when they can advance and charge, and they don't even care about giving up shooting if you take kill saws. If you have them jumping out of a cheap truck to get them there, you could potentially zoom them into somewhere threatening in the midboard turn 1, or even just threaten to get out the front and charge extra far. Including a disembark, the advance and charge, and their regular move and charge distance, you'd have an average charge threat of 19 inches there. Then, of course, their durability is absolutely crazy, particularly if they can get cover or use the AP debuff stratagem, and adding in a war boss makes them extra threatening. They certainly could use Ghazghkull or a big mech if you wanted to. Kind of not hard to see why 3 units of 5 seem to be in just about every competitive 2000 point Bully Boyz list that's done well. In just about any direct 1-to-1 fight with just about anything in 40k for the turns that you're triggering the war. They're probably going to come out on top, at least for the points that you've invested in them. I guess their biggest weaknesses are that they still have kind of low OC and not the biggest volume of attacks with those kill saws for the points, I guess. And say on turn 4, if you did drop out of the war there, they suddenly go down in power a lot, being far easier to kill, far less fast and far less dangerous. Otherwise, to support all of them, there's plenty of other interesting options, just generic or good things like Gretchen and Storm Boys to score objectives for nice and cheap, plus likely wanting other things that can benefit from the 2 turns of war bosses or beast bosses, leading boys or beast snagger boys. I feel like Squighog boys are still interesting enough for 2 turns worth of 5+ invulnerable, plus the war combat benefits. You could just take pretty maximal more Nobz in trucks as many points as you can fit. They're good units in general, getting 2 turns of war is great, and they can use that nice reroll to hit stratagem if they want to. Finally, I thought it could be interesting to see what competitive players are making of the detachment, with just a quick look at a few lists that have done well and placed first or second in tournaments in the first few weeks following the Codex. This first one is by Jeff Jew, who used it to take first at Loaded Dice May the 4th Open, a 32-player grand tournament. This one has 3 units of 5 Meganobz, backed up by 2 war bosses in Mega Armor to lead them, one with Big Gob for the Battle Shock test, and one with Teleporter, so I guess that one will go in Deep Strike and potentially Rapid Ingress. So you'd have 2 trucks for all of them and 1 regular squad out of Deep Strike. Then there's 3 war bosses with Power Claws and a Pain Boy. It looks like 2 of them are leading Nobz squads, 1 unit of 10 and 1 unit of 5 in Power Claws, again likely jumping out of trucks there. And then it looks like the 3rd war boss with Pain Boy leads a big unit of regular boys, going for maybe a little slice of Green Tide-like action there. A big scary, very high objective control unit that will have a 5+ invulnerable save and a 5+ feel no pain for 2 turns in a row. Ideally, I guess if you could keep them hidden turn 1 until they start to actually take fire with that, you could have just an enormous unit that's going to be very hard to take off control of one objective. Then there's 3 units of 11 Gretchen, which are never bad to have, farming the command points and doing the secondary missions and things. 2 units of 5 Storm Boys, again for deep striking or moving fast to do secondaries, and Boss Snickrot, the Orky Lone Operative, again excellent for secondary things with his teleporting around the board trick, potentially having a bit of melee threats to bully some lighter enemy units along the way. Overall, really quite scary stuff. 3 enormous Meganobz units, plus 2 fairly terrifying Nobz plus Warboss combos, and an enormous blob of boys to hold down one objective, and take that with a whole load of OC. Otherwise, for a couple of other takes on it, we've also got this one by Tom Green, who used it to take first at South Coast GT, again going 5 games undefeated. This one's 3 units of Meganobz once more, and it looks like we've got 2 war bosses without enhancements, and 1 big mech in Mega Armor, plus Ghazghkull Thrasher as well. I guess that's 1 more character than we have Meganobz squads. I genuinely am not sure who's running solo with this one. Not too sure whether it's one of the bosses or Ghazghkull himself. I suppose if you were fighting against a foe that didn't have some serious shooting, you could even run the big mech solo and swap out depending on the foe. Otherwise, we've got a big scary unit of Nobz with Power Claws, who I'm guessing goes with the war boss, 2 units of 10 boys for objective things. Looks like at least 1 unit would go in the truck there, 1 unit of Storm Boys and 2 units of Gretchen, and then 2 units of War Bikers, which is interesting enough. Nice cheap skirmishers that move very quickly there, and then they're all loaded into 5 trucks to get them up the board. Kind of cool to have Ghazghkull on the table with that big aura of lethal hits, plus his own savage damage against anything that he can catch. Plus this one really does have quite a lot of good objective support with the boys squads, plus those nice fast skirmishing war bikes. Last up for a third take on Scary Meganobz doing well so far, we've got this list that plays second at an event called Carnage Warp Surge in Hull by all-around great guy Chris Taylor. This one's shaking up the formula a little bit on the Meganobz, 2 units of 5 of them armed with shooters and power claws, and then 1 bigger unit of 6 with 4 kill saws and 2 power claws and shooters, headed up by 3 war bosses in Mega Armor taking 1 of each of the enhancements, 1 with the teleporter, 1 with Big Gob, and 1 with their biggest boss. I guess that the smaller units are jumping out of the trucks along with the mega bosses, the big unit maybe in Deep Strike, perhaps Rapid Ingress with a teleporter boss, and then there's another 2 trucks to back them up full of Greenskin Violence, 3 units of Meganobz, 2 of 5 and 1 of 10, all led by a war boss each. A serious amount of carnage there with 6 war bosses on the table getting 2 turns worth of war. Then for objective support we've got 2 units of Gretchen and 2 units of Storm Boys to handle all the secondary needs, plus interestingly enough a unit of infiltrators here shelling out for a unit of 10 commandos. That could be pretty big to screen out certain threats, or just have really quite a nasty unit on a midfield objective from turn 1 I guess. This one certainly focuses on what the detachment's best on, taking the prize for most bosses, Nobz and Meganobz on the table out of any of the ones we've seen so far. Overall, it's looking like Bully Boyz are going to remain a force to be reckoned with for the next few months or so. I can't help but think that at the next points update, there's at least a reasonable chance that Meganobz might go up by 5 points a model. though until then it does look like they're going to remain a bit of a devastating force on the tabletop and a struggle for a whole load of enemies to handle. At least at early takes though, it looks like Bully Boyz might be one of the single strongest ways to play Orcs at the moment. Let me know your thoughts if you've played either with or against the detachment down in the comments below. Look forward to hearing all your thoughts and ideas, and anything else important I might have missed about the list. Otherwise, if you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every single day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.